since 2012. Again, I'm maybe conservatively 8 or 10,000 off-road miles on my old Land Cruiser, still driving around on the same tires. It's never broken down. It's never left me stranded. A guy blew by me in a 50 Studebaker at like 130. Whoa, Baja, man, this place is crazy.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. My name is Maurice Merrick, and greetings to all of you listening from places like East Wareham, Massachusetts, Laramie, Wyoming, Hammond, Louisiana, Lima, Peru, Goiânia, Brazil, Lilienthal, Germany, and Doncaster, England. Thanks for making this humble podcast a part of your day. Okay, so I have to do a little self-promotion here, and I know you guys get this. If I want new listeners, I could spend huge wads of cash on some marketing campaign, or I could just ask you to help me out. So here it goes. If you enjoy what I'm doing here, seriously, tell your friends that this is a different kind of automotive podcast. Help spread the word about the show. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, tap those 3 little dots that you see on your screen, and then tap share and send the show to a friend. If you've heard more than 1 or 2 episodes, then you know how focused I am and how tight I like to keep it. And that's because I respect the value of your time. We're all busy, right? And you give me a small portion of your day, and hopefully I entertain you. So get the word out. Tell your friends about Horsepower Heritage, and let's grow the audience together. And by the way, we're doing really well. I can't thank you enough for all the support so far. I'm going to keep this thing going, and I just need you to help me out. And that's my pitch, all right? So one more thing before we get started here. If you don't already follow me on Instagram, do that now, and just send me a direct message to say hi, and I'll send you a Horsepower Heritage decal if you want one. You guys are awesome, and I'm happy to send you a little something, so thank you very much. All right. Well, today my guest is Michael Emery. Michael is, I guess, what I'd call a serial adventurer. So whether it's professional or otherwise, he kind of just goes out and discovers things he's passionate about, and he commits himself to that pursuit. Michael hosts his own podcast called Slow Baja, which is part travelogue, part slice of life, part off-road odyssey. And I've got to say, it's a haven from the onslaught of social media and crisis headlines and all the frantic chatter in our world every day. Now, when you think about Baja California, you probably think about the desert and surfing and off-road racing and tacos and beer and maybe getting into some trouble. And Michael's done all of that, but he also knows there's something deeper about the place. So if you want to relax and just enjoy good vibes, I recommend you follow Slow Baja on whatever podcast app you use and pour yourself a frosty beer and tap on an episode and listen in. And I promise you'll enjoy it. So without further ado, I give you Michael Emery right here on Horsepower Heritage. Let's hit it. Well, Michael, thanks for being with me today. I'm really excited about this.
Good.
And I have to say, first of all, how much I really enjoy your podcast.
Hey, and by the way, you're working your ass off on this thing. It's a lot easier to just Zoom somebody and ask a bunch of questions and let them talk. But You're writing stories, doing research, bringing stuff up.
Thank you. By the way, there's a reflection on one of the photographs behind you, so I can't quite make it out, but that's either Jim Clark or Briggs Cunningham.
Oh, you are a pretty smart boy. We're going to get over here to the Jesse Alexander collection.
All right.
It is Jim Clark. I don't know if we can get to that. 3 Jesse Alexanders. So Jim Clark, Fangio, Sterling Moss.
Yep.
Helped Jesse Alexander get his last book funded with a brilliant idea. And he sent me this as a thank you. The start of the 67 Monaco Grand Prix.
Fantastic. I love it. I don't know if you heard my Jackie Stewart episode a few weeks ago.
I did, and I enjoyed it immensely.
Good. I'm glad. I'm always nervous because, there are a lot of guys out there who are older and much wiser and know far more. They've forgotten more than I'll know about this stuff. So to do this subject matter justice, it's a little intimidating. I want to do it justice and give the story depth, but you can't take 3 hours to tell the story. You've got to boil it down. So it's tough.
No, well, you're quite good at it. And I'm not saying that to unnecessarily fluff your ego here, but you're taking a challenging course to this. But to put yourself out there and come up with these stories where you also have to be an authority and get the frickin' facts right, that's no easy task. So I admire you for that. The Jackie Stewart one I enjoyed immensely. I've read his biography. I think it's so interesting that he was a skeet shooter. Skeet shooting changed my younger son's life and then led him to rowing because there was a rowing club across the lake. And, he told me, Dad, Graham Hill was a rower. That's why he's got those stripes on his helmet. And it's just interesting stuff like that. So kudos to you for taking on these challenging subjects and carving a different niche.
Thank you. Yeah. And I really meant what I said. I love your show. Can't wait to hear what's coming. What spurred you into podcasting? How did that all start?
I got into listening to podcasts because I was making these drives down to LA to see my wife. She's flying down there for work. We've got 2 kids going, our twins. We have twins. They're both in school in Southern California. They don't need to see their parents, but they do need to see their dogs. And so, probably once a month I was jumping in the 4Runner and blazing a trail to LA with a couple of elderly dachshunds with me and, just needed something to pass those miles. And I started researching podcasts and started researching Baja specifically. And there was very, very little on Baja. And so pretty quickly I found the one show on it and I was listening to it and I sent the host a message and said, I just want to tell you about the show that you produced on Bruce Myers, the creator of the Myers Manx. I knew the Myers Manx vehicle. Certainly, you see people with dune buggies and, they're kind of cool. It's not my thing, but people are into them. Yeah, I get it. But I just didn't know the story behind the creator. I thought it was very powerful. Bruce is tearing up and talking about his struggles as a car builder, and he didn't, retain the copyright of the trademark of his vehicle, and it was being knocked off all over the world. And he was super bitter about that. And that story really moved me. So I sent a note to the show host, like immediately, sent a note back, hey, what's Slow Baja about? And a couple of days later, I'm sitting in his home studio in LA recording a podcast with him. And I thought, I've seen behind the curtain of podcasting. I could do this. And I've been thinking about it. I was actually going to meet with my Mexico adventure buddy who had been in the internet space very early. He had a website on Mexico called Mex Online, and he got in early enough in the 90s that he could have owned Mexico.com and felt that you needed to explain that it was Mexico and online. So he launched a site called Mex Online instead of Mexico.com. Never really cashed in on it, but I was going to San Diego to talk to him about launching a podcast, and then all of a sudden I'm recording one on the way, which was just amazing. Like, wow, this is like the planets are aligning. And so then I just started guest hosting for Jim Riley on his Baja show, but I've always kind of done my own thing. And, as photography has gone away as a career, you have to kind of look at how do you still tell stories that are relevant and meaningful. A couple of my passions are Mexico for sure and storytelling. And so launched Slow Baja, started talking to people, and then figured out how to get the podcast into a platform that people could actually find it, figure out how to get people to listen to it. And, I'm glad we're about a year apart from when I first got onto Apple and Spotify and all that. And Slow Baja is going along, swimmingly. And, I'm very excited. It's really been rewarding to have birthed this thing and figured out week after week after week who to talk to and what to do and where to go. And, can't wait to get to Baja and record that next show.
The name of the show, Slow Baja, kind of captures it all, but also your tagline, what is it? Tequila, tacos, and tranquilo. Like I told you before, it just puts me in a good place mentally and sort of metaphysically.
Well, it's a couple of tequilas that usually put me in that place. So
right.
I'm happy. I'm not enjoying that. I'm on straight water right now, but
as am I. But let's back up prior to the podcasting. You're a creative guy, right? You have a journalism degree, and I think you were a professional photographer for some time. And being a Bay Area guy, the Bay Area is a very hectic, ever-changing place. And I can't think of many places that are as much of a contrast.
Yeah, I live right in the heart of San Francisco, right where they filmed Bullet, where Steve McQueen comes sailing over the hill, those big, tall hills. That's 4 houses from where I live. I used to live, my first apartment was where he lands, on that first jump. So I'm in a very congested, very busy part of San Francisco. And one of the things I love is just, get across the border and within, 20 minutes, a half hour, you can be on dirt roads and it's desolation on your doorstep. And that for me it's just a life-changing, it's an Instagram filter for my soul without being too flippant about it. But it's at, middle age, it's a great release and a great reset for my soul.
What was your introduction to Baja California?
Yeah, I ended up in college in San Diego. Didn't put a whole lot of thought into where I was going to go to school. I had an older cousin at San Diego State, and I went and visited him, and he took me to a party, and had a great time. And I went, yep, okay, they got a good newspaper. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to go to school here. And so that same cousin, maybe a week or two before school started, said, dude, let's go down to Puerto Nuevo and get us some lobster. I'm like, whatever, yeah, let's go. And had a great lobster dinner in a little fishing village there that now is blown up into a place that's probably 30 lobster restaurants. But back in the early 80s, there's probably a dozen lobster restaurants or so. And we had a lobster dinner and a bit to drink. He'd brought his girlfriend with him to drive us back because she didn't drink, and managed to get pulled over on the way home, had to bribe a police officer. I was riding in the back of the pickup truck looking at the stars, thinking what a gorgeous, beautiful night. And then it was like needle scratching the record. We're getting pulled over. And, 5 minutes later, my cousin's bribing this cop and we're on our way. And I'm like, whoa, Baja, man, this place is crazy. So following that for years, it was just beach trips, camping, drinking because it was next door. It was less expensive. And that's where kids, before you were 21, that's an easy place for kids in San Diego to go drink. And that's what it was for me for years. And it took a very long time before I actually scratched the surface and got past that. But when I did, man alive, what a place. What an amazing place.
That was such a gringo story of Baja.
You asked.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know a guy who had a similar drunken adventure in Baja in college and fell out of the back of a pickup truck in the dark of night. They had no idea he'd rolled out of there. And he woke up in a chicken coop on the side of the road and somehow managed to find his way back to his crew. But yeah, that's sort of a quintessential college Baja story. But you're right. There's so much more to it than that. That's what I like about your show. You really are exploring so many different facets of the place. Americans' impression of Baja, or maybe the world's impression of Baja, is very much media driven. We get little snippets of Baja, whether it's the Mexican road racing or the fishing villages or the desert itself, that desolate landscape. But what is it about, say, the people and the culture of Baja that hit you?
Well, I think that's once you do slow down enough to start really enjoying the place at a different pace, it's inevitable that you'll have an experience where you just come away and say, wow, that was amazing. That person was amazing. Years ago, I was traveling with my wife and 3 young kids, and we had quit our jobs and were moving down to Baja to spend some time just sort of unwinding. And on the first morning, we were driving on a little stretch of dirt road and got a flat tire in our Honda Odyssey minivan. And so, we've got a flat. It's 2 twins and a 2-year-old twins and a 4-year-old. My wife's kind of freaking out. It's miles from anything. And, so I'd get out and I changed the tire and I said, don't worry. As soon as we get onto the main road, there'll be a tire shop. Somebody will fix this tire. We'll be right back. We'll be fine. And there was, within a mile of hitting the main road, somebody had the tire fixed and all was well. But there's a culture of kindness and a culture of giving. And I think that's what is mainly missed in the United States when you say Mexico or you say Baja, people immediately launch to, oh, isn't the crime so bad there? And maybe they saw a news clip of something horrific that happened that maybe was drug cartel crime or something. But, again, I've been going there 37 years. And outside of that first trip where my cousin gave a police officer a $10 mordita, the bite, because I was illegally in the back of the truck, we haven't had another problem until this last trip in January. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But, I find it very safe. I find the people wonderful. I love the culture. I love the food. I love the weather. So for me, it's a crime not to go there.
One of the themes I've noticed in your podcast is, there's an edge to Baja because it is an unforgiving landscape. By necessity in Baja, people are very interdependent. You really have to take care of one another down there. And I think that, locals don't discriminate. That's the theme I get from many of your episodes.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted that there may be an underlying theme in my show that I'm not consciously aware of, but it does come through, and it comes through in many, many ways. And you hit the nail on the head. That is a commonality of Baja for sure, but possibly life in Mexico as well. I mean, we lived in the mainland of Mexico for kind of an extended vacation, 6-7 months, and fell into needing our neighbors for a lot of things. And the street that I live on in San Francisco that I've lived on for 25 years, there's only one neighbor on my street that I could call on. But as you've heard, if you've listened to the shows many times, Sarah Beck talked about rolling her truck, with her 2 little kids in the car. And who's going to stop for them? Local Mexican stops, and really looked after them. And the sadness of that was, how many Americans drove by in their RVs or their pickup trucks and went, "Oh, wow, that looks like a gnarly accident," but who stopped? The local, right. And that's saying something. And maybe it is living a little bit closer to the bone, or maybe it's just a cultural touchstone that they have less and they need the help of their neighbors, and they offer that help freely.
Yeah, I think the more affluent we've become in the United States, the more isolated we've become. And I know that's a huge generality, but it's almost weird to say hello to a stranger in many parts of the United States. You don't get that in the rural areas as much. People are friendlier, but certainly like in Southern California, I mean, it's weird to say hi to a stranger. And that's not so in Baja.
No, I remember my first sort of adventurous trip, one of the spring break trips that I took. I think it was back in '87, as the kids were starting to head north again, the migration north back to comfort and fast food. 3 or 4 days of drinking was enough. My buddy and my college roommate and I piled into my Toyota Corona with nothing more than a piece of foam that we were sleeping on and 3 sleeping bags, and just drove for points south. We didn't know where we were going, didn't know what we were going to do, but we were going to drive as far as our gas money could carry us in those days. And literally the last day we were picking up bottles and returning beer bottles for the deposit to get, the couple of bucks of gas to get back. But when we got to San Ignacio, and there's that beautiful mission in the downtown, it's just a tiny little downtown square, but it's a beautiful oasis after all this desert. And we just needed to get out and stretch our legs. So we took a little lap of the town, and everyone said hello to us, and we said hello to everyone. And it really, again, it's 1987. It's a long time ago, but that is so clear in my mind. We made eye contact. We said hello. It's a different pace of life. And I think that's what Slow Baja is about to some degree as well, is just finding that. It's not everywhere. People are looking at their phones there like they're looking at their phones here. So it's not everywhere, but it is not nearly as prevalent there as it is here, where people do make the time there for conversation to, change their plans, whatever plans they might have had, to change their plans and have a beer with you. If you pull out that fine bottle of Fortaleza tequila, they're smart enough to say, whatever I was doing, I'll join you for that shot. And that one might lead to another one, which might lead to a conversation, which might lead to who you never know what. And that's also something that there's more spontaneity and there's more openness to that interaction, that humanity. There's more openness to humanity, I think.
So, Michael, you're a car guy. Let's talk about the Datsun. Is that the car that you campaigned under the Lucha Libre Racing banner?
Yeah. So years ago in San Felipe, as a college kid on spring break, I heard the sound of a V12 Ferrari. And I'd grown up pretty close to Sears Point and had spent a lot of time at Sears Point. And as a young budding photographer, had worked for the PR director at Sears Point when I was 16, photographing auto racing for the local weekly newspaper in my little town. And I really loved the vintage stuff. I'd grown up reading my dad's road and track magazines. I knew all about the racing of the 60s and 70s. And as an 80s kid, I loved going to Sears Point or Laguna Seca and seeing 25-year-old Ferraris and Mercedes-Benzes, 50s and 60s Mercedes-Benzes are just being flogged, like a 300 SL that's just being flogged out there on the track. Cobras that were just being driven hard, short wheelbase Ferraris that were just, again, guys just could drive them. They weren't that expensive and they had their foot into them. So being a spring break kid and with half a heat on and hearing a V12 Ferrari, pretty unmistakable sound coming into this little beach town, I just followed the sound and happened into the very end of a vintage car race that was the first rerunnings of the La Carrera Panamericana. And so in those days, they ran it across the Baja Peninsula from Ensenada to San Felipe. And they did that in like 87 and 88 or 86 and 87. So that's the first place I saw it. And then fast forward to 2001, we're actually living in mainland Mexico, just checked out of our lives. My wife had quit her job. I was the governor of California's photographer, and he was I'm not going to say anything about him. He wasn't the most lively guy, we'll put it that way. Great Avis. So it was fun. It was a great job. The economy was booming. But when my wife quit her job, it forced my hand, and I left the governor's employ, and we rented our place out and ended up in Mexico. And my dad was flying down for Day of the Dead, and I was driving out to the airport to pick him up early in the morning, and a guy blew by me in a 50 Studebaker at like 130. I'm just like, what the heck? I mean, first of all, it's a 1950 Studebaker with that bullet nose, and then it had a number plate on the side, and it went by me so fast and so loud. And I'm in my little Honda minivan, so I, floored it, and I'm doing about 105 or 108 or something. He's just a speck on the distance. So pick up my dad from the airport. I said, Dad, you would never believe this 50 student went by me at 130 today. Anyways, when we got back to town, the La Carrera was in our town. And in those days, the La Carrera came through for 2 nights into Zacatecas and spent 2 fun, crazy nights. Happened to be World Series was on TV. So I had to walk down to the local bar where all the racers were hanging out. And I just got hooked. I was talking to Doug Mockett, and he's driving a 53 Oldsmobile, and he's got white hair and spectacles. And I just said, you see any speed on this race? He said, I was doing 165 today. And I'm looking at the guy, and I'm like, is he pulling my chain? And I said, you're doing 165 in that? And I said, yeah. He said, yeah. Coming in from Aguas Calientes. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, what else do you race? Just kind of trying to qualify him to see if, again, if he's BS me. He said, well, I have a vintage Formula One car that I keep in Europe, and I've got another vintage Formula One car that I race here in the States. So immediately I know, okay, this guy's a baller. He can do anything he wants. So I said, so how does this race compare? He said, you got to figure out how to do it sometime. You just have to figure out. It's the best week of my life. Whatever's happening in my life, it's all on hold for this 10 days that I'm down here. It's the greatest week-long race in the world. Figure out how to do it. It's accessible. You can get in. So that just sort of ate at me. Fast forward to turning 40. We were living on the East Coast. My wife got a great job offer in Massachusetts, and I'm just back there like total fish out of water. And I just was like, I have to do something for my manhood. I got to do something here. I can't be baking cookies every day. And so as I was closing in on my 40th birthday, I had a buddy who was dying of cancer, college friend, and got together with my college buddies out in California and drank way too much, way into the wee hours in the morning, and got on to what's on our bucket list. And I said, I want to do that car race down in Mexico. And a buddy of mine said, hey, if you want to do it, I'll give you my old Datsun Roadster. And I'm like, oh, I had a Datsun 510. That was a hell of a car when I was a teenager and college kid. Datsun Roadster? Sounds great. It was a Datsun Fairlady. They had the 1600 and the 2000, which was the same car with a higher performance engine. And due to the rules of the event, when I got in, you had to have a car that was 1965 or older or identical to a 65. So I ended up with a 67 1600 Roadster to meet the rules. Turns out it was kind of a race car with training wheels. It was a lot of fun, but it was just way too slow. We had to drive it literally flat out all day. So twisty, rainy mountain sections, we were right in the middle of the pack. Big, wide open, high-speed sections, we were all the way at the end. But it was a hell of a good time. I had Fortaleza with us. We had 10 cases of tequila, so 60 bottles of tequila for 7 days of racing. It was something. So it just planted a seed. Like, you know what? Get in there with a 100 horsepower car. Don't die. Go slow. Finish. Don't die. I didn't know. I mean, I'd taken 3 days of the Bondurant school when I got out of high school, but that was a lot of years before. Autocrossed a couple times, drove fast on some back roads, but I was certainly no racer. And so to take on a race where you build a car, drag it down to the very bottom of Mexico, to Chiapas, and then race it 2,000 miles back, I mean, it's a little more complicated than a weekend at the track.
What kind of support team did you have on that race?
That's probably the hardest aspect of that race. I had originally was going to have the car builder, my dad, and my nephew. My nephew was a mechanic, and that just all fizzled out. Getting people to the very bottom of Mexico, right on the border with Central America, is a tall order. And then they're running a race amongst themselves. They have to leapfrog the event, get around, figure out where to set up the midday service. And then if you break down, they have to backtrack and drive over, the race route to pick you up where you are. So it's a tall order. I ended up, after the failure of my initial team, reaching out to some guys that I had found on the internet down in Texas. I was researching a car there because my car build wasn't going very well, and I was going to buy a car that was a track Datsun that was for sale down in Texas. And through some forum, I just reached out to a guy in Texas and said, "What do you think of this car? And it looks to me like you've also run the La Carrera. What do you think of this car in the La Carrera?" And he just set me straight. He said, "Dude, what are you thinking? You can't go to the La Carrera with people who don't know the La Carrera. I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster. You're going to be racing and worrying about your team that's going to be lost and crying someplace on the side of the road. Is not, even if you're experienced racers, just trying to figure out how to get from, how to cover 2,000 miles of back roads in mainland Mexico is not for everyone." So he generously offered his support and the support of his car builder and racer when they had raced, two guys from Texas, for just expenses. So I covered their airfare and meals and hotels and all that. And they came down to help me out. And it was magnificent. And so then the next time I did it, I was so addicted to this thing, I actually offered my own car as an arrive and drive because I didn't have the money to go do it again. And I just needed to do it. And so I offered an arrive and drive, and the fellow who rented my car, he had a next door neighbor who was retired and doing well in life, fiddled with cars, and he was going to come down to be the crew chief. And they had his nephew who was going to, assist him. Great guys, but I had all the experience. So I was the one-eyed man leading the blind at this stage. So I had all the experience of having done this once, and said, we need to have somebody who's willing to work all night in a mud puddle, on a back road to get our car back on the road. And that's not your next door neighbor who fiddles with his car collection, for a couple hours, then watches the news and has a tall one, and, is on his yacht on the weekend. That most people are just not cut out for that. So I was friends with a Datsun racer from Monterrey, Mexico, and he secured a guy who would come and help us, if we needed, but he could live with his crew. And, the car was so well put together that we actually didn't need any service at all. So it was terrific to have all this tequila and not need to fix the car and be able to run flat out every day. Made for a hell of a good time. So it was a hell of an adventure. I did it twice in the Datsun, finished both times. And then I became a navigator for a fellow in a 53 Lincoln, and he had raced it a few times, had not finished. And my goal was just to get him across the finish line. We did have, somewhat of an off, no damage to the car. It was enough of an off that I figured out we were going to roll, and, I was going to be 100 feet down a ravine in a creek, but we got hung up on a rock. That didn't occur. But it was enough that my wife said, enough is enough.
Right.
Managed to get back one more year as a photographer, and then decided I better sell a race car so I don't have that allure trying to call me back to Mexico every October.
How did you hook up with Fortaleza, by the way?
That's a secret, trade secret.
Okay.
No, they were a super small brand way back in 2008. And through a friend of a friend, I mean, they were so small, they were literally storing all the tequila. I think San Diego might have been their only market. They were storing all the tequila for the San Diego market in my Mexico Adventure buddy's office. So it was just like, oh yeah, I know the brand ambassador, maybe we can get hooked up with some free tequila. And then because I was ambitious enough and realized the opportunity, I poured it for all these wealthy racers who love Mexico and got it out on the internet. And, not because of me solely, but, 13 years later, I'm still doing stuff with them. And they were the number one trending tequila brand this year. And it was interesting that, people could have had this wonderful relationship with Mexico. They're spending a lot of money there. They're racing cars. They love Mexico. But yet, most of the people that are doing that La Carrera event I'm talking about, they've achieved quite a bit in their lives. They're usually a little bit older. They've achieved quite a bit. And most of them have never had a fine tequila. I mean, if they have, they'd had a Patron or something. So to offer them a sip of tequila and have them say, oh, no thanks. And then to say, well, you might want to try this. This añejo in my local liquor store is about $95 a bottle. And then people say, oh, what? Oh, and so then you pour a little sip of that and it's like, oh, maybe I'll have a little more of that. And then it was probably the best part of racing in Mexico. And certainly one of the most fun parts of adventuring in Baja is having this sponsor that they give me carte blanche to just pour and talk about the brand. I've been to the distillery. It is all handmade. There's no sleight of hand. There are no additives. It's basically tequila being made as it was, made 100 years ago. The only addition is a little tractor turns a stone now instead of a mule, but it's a beautiful product. And most people are pretty ignorant about that. And then when you taste it, if you like Scotch, I have a son who's going to school in Scotland. People live, breathe whiskeys in Scotland, or wine, where you're tasting the soil from all over the world in the different wine regions. Well, tequila is very much the same way. You're going to taste the soil. You're going to taste it lowland or highland or whatever. And I'm very, very lucky that, Fortaleza is a fabulous tequila, and one sip of it, it changes people's opinions rapidly. And then, I'm their best friend, which is not so bad either.
Well, you're going to have to send me an airplane bottle of it.
Yeah, I'll stop by on my next trip through Southern California and pour you a little.
I would love it. By the way, we need to touch on the name Lucha Libre Racing, because I thought that was the greatest name. Where'd you come up with that? And tell people what it means. Yeah.
So, again, going to Mexico and being a phony racer, I hate to say it that way, but that was probably one of my underlying concerns, like, not taking myself very seriously. My Mexico adventure buddy, Ted Donovan, I sent him an email and said, hey, I need 3 weeks of your life. And he sent an email back immediately. Yeah, he's freshly married, whatever, baby on the way. Yeah, I'll give you 3 weeks of my life, no problem. He never looked at another email. And so when I told him, like, what's your blood? When I asked him, I needed your blood type, because I was having his driver's suit embroidered and I was having his helmet painted with his name and blood type. He's like, a what? Blood type? And so, having way too much time to think about, like, what are we doing here? Who are we? What's Mexico all about? I'd lived down there, and I just kind of was poking fun at ourselves one day. And I just said, like, anything goes. It's like Lucha Libre means, free fight, but what it translates to is anything goes. And, that was our spirit in that event. And, spent a little bit of money that we didn't have and had great stickers made and, hats and whatnot. And it just really kind of took off. And it was a lot of fun to, again, like, I got a t-shirt order out of the blue once. Guy ordered a dozen t-shirts, and that just doesn't happen. Dozen t-shirts and dozen hats. I'm like, how did you hear about me? Oh, I bought a vintage Allard that had raced in the La Carrera and it had one of your stickers on the car. So I looked you up. You guys look like you're a lot of fun. Like, well, all right, dude. So it's just, it was a lot of fun, poking fun at myself. And that sort of, that morphed my first Baja trip in the Land Cruiser. We were still handing out Lucha Libre racing stickers, but it really didn't feel like we were racing anymore. And I needed to come up with something that kind of fit what we were doing. And the idea of not being experienced off-roaders and driving this rather stock vintage Land Cruiser. I mean, it just hit me one day. It's like, dude, you are Slow Baja. And so once you get it painted on the side of your car, you are that, whether you want to be or not. But it does set the expectations, and it is a reminder for me. And now Slow Baja's, with good stickers and t-shirts and hats, it's kind of taken off on its own.
Yeah. And I like the fact that name just says you just don't take yourself too seriously,
That's a recurring theme in my life, not taking myself too seriously.
So that was your entree to racing in Mexico, but...
Well, no, when I finally sold my Datsun race car, which I sold on Bring a Trailer when they were back in the classified days, and, I was texting back and forth with the founder, 11 o'clock at night before the car went live, and had it sold with cash in hand, less than 12 hours later. It made me realize, too bad they didn't have an auction site then. But sold the car, and pretty quickly, the cash was going to become a backyard remodel for our place here in San Francisco. And I thought, I need to get onto Craigslist today and find something really cool to buy, and found the 71 FJ40. Old guy owned it up in Napa, and that vehicle led to first off-road trip in Baja 2012, where we traversed the peninsula. Just looked at a map and went, hey, here's a squiggly line of dirt that runs all the way across the peninsula. And you think, is that like 6 hours? Is that 11 hours? There's no gas stations out there. I get 10 miles to the gallon on the highway. How many miles to the gallon do I get in dirt? I've got a range of 150 miles. This is like almost 200 miles. How are we going to do it? And it just struck me as like it was a whole new set of problems and a lot of fun. Fast forward to 2019, I had entered the Baja XL Rally, which is a 3,000 mile, mostly on dirt, Redondo Beach to Cabo to Redondo Beach in 10 days. Pretty adventurous group. The guy who founded that rally puts on the Budapest to Bamako rally. So if you are intrepid enough to jump in a $1,500 banger car and drive it from Hungary to West Africa, that's the kind of life he leads. And he, to do something fun and easy, he put together a little 3,000 mile Baja off-road event. It's an interesting event, again, because it's put on by a Hungarian. So it brings in a lot of Europeans and some Canadians. And it's, I think, pretty squarely aimed at the rooftop tent crowd. So it's not a high speed event like the Baja races that you have in your mind with trucks going airborne over the whoops. There are puzzles to figure out, clues to solve, waypoints to check in, sort of geocaching, our old fashioned rallying where you can't go over this speed, you can't do this. So there's a lot of technical stuff to figure out. I don't do any of that. It's not for me. I don't need any extra challenges when I'm in Baja. So I'm in the touring category, which you get a starting point and an end point, and you figure out how you want to get there. I do that on a vintage paper map, and we open it up and we look for sort of the most scenic squiggly lines. It's really a very good time with very interesting people. The first time I did in 2019, 140 cars from around the world. I think there are 25 different countries represented, about 300 people. This year is smaller again because of COVID and, travel concerns and all that. It was about 80 cars, probably 175 people. People, they get stuck in the mud. They, we look at the route and say, well, it's raining. The dry lake isn't going to be the dry lake. So we're not going to go anywhere near it. We're going to, drive this dirt road to this paved road to get around it, to live to fight another day, the sort of rope-a-dope mentality of off-roading. But people go in there and they tear their stuff up and, get stuck up to the axles, and they have a lot of fun with it, and they camp in the rain and they do all that stuff. And my hat's off to them. I have tequila at the ready for when I see them broken down on the side of the road, or when we get into camp at night. There's a official campground every night. Most nights there's probably some town within, 5, 10, 15, 20 miles. We tend to lean towards getting a room and getting a bed if we can, but oftentimes, that's not really convenient. So we've got the camp gear with us, and we're not opposed to throwing up a tent and blowing up the air mattresses and rolling out the sleeping bags. Although Ted really does snore. So if we keep on doing these sort of things, I think I might have to get a cot so I can get, 50 yards away and sleep out under the stars with my earplugs in. After I did that, I don't think I have the skills immediately to become an off-road racer, but I certainly want to off-road a lot more. And so again, getting back to sort of setting the bar for interacting with some serious off-roaders in that 2019 event, that's when I painted Slow Baja on the side of the car to sort of just set the bar and remind me. One of the things that we painted on the glove box of the old Datsun was the Muhammad Ali strategy, rope-a-dope. So anytime I was too hot, just sliding it into the turns and using up the entire road and trying to go 10 tenths, Ted Donovan would tap that glove box and remind me to rope-a-dope, that we just needed to cover up for 15 or 16 rounds and then come out swinging at the end. So I just needed that Slow Baja to remind me of what we're doing here is not off-road racing. We've got a stock 50-year-old vehicle on 30-inch tires that are 10 years old. At least I've owned them for 10 years. I don't know how old they were when I got them, but we're just doing stuff a little bit differently. And that's the point.
And the FJ40 has been kind of your go-to vehicle since that time in Baja, right?
Yeah. Since I sold the Datsun, I've had some other fun cars, an E28, a Datsun Roadster, some other daily driver classics, but I live in San Francisco. I've got 3 kids, in college, what have you. I have a 2-car parking garage. So it's just difficult having another classic. So classics have come and gone. The Land Cruiser has stayed, takes up half my garage, and it's a long first day to drive it from here down to San Diego. Usually I go down 101 and it's, 10 or 11 hours, gets 10 miles to the gallon. So you're stopping a lot. But it's my machine. So I get up, once or twice a year into the Sierras and go off-roading with some friends who have old 4x4s. That's a lot of fun, flat fendered Jeeps and Mercedes-Benz Unimogs and, just a bunch of old stuff, Land Rovers and whatnot, but old, fun, carbureted stuff. And that's a hoot in the mud, but Baja is where I really love. And so 2021, end of January 2021, did the Baja XL again. That's every other year. So we did the 2019 and then came back and did the 2021. This year with COVID, it was a little crazier. The police got involved and we got shaken down. I was a couple hours in a police station in Santa Rosalia. And, it's part of the adventure. You're a podcaster. One of my great moments of podcasting, if I've had them in my short career, was being in a tiny little restaurant in Bahia de Los Angeles and having a policeman walk in and walk right to our table and basically ask us if we're the organizers of the event, and then go on a tirade about the event, didn't have permits and this and that and all this stuff. So, we feigned ignorance, would not go outside with him. Probably 10 minutes of interrogation, standing at our table in this tiny little restaurant. He finally is satisfied that we're not involved and leaves. And as I'm looking around the restaurant, there are probably 6 tables with people sitting there. My podcast guest for the next morning is sitting next to us, Roger Mears, who's having dinner with his wife and a guy who was turning 92 that day. So, that evening. So it was just kind of funny to have to introduce myself to him afterwards. Hey, I'm the guy, Michael Emery. I'm coming over to your house tomorrow to interview you. Yeah.
And Roger Mears is a veteran Baja racer.
Yeah, veteran Baja racer. He has a well-known younger brother, Rick Mears, who's won the Indy 500 a few times and a bunch of other stuff.
Of course.
Roger's an off-road motorsports Hall of Famer, raced a bunch of stuff, and just a damn fine human being, really quiet, humble, wonderful, the kind of people that you find living quietly in Baja who open their home to you and say, yep, yeah, you can come talk to me about my life. And then it's like, why are you leaving so soon? You want to go fishing? You want to hang around? And it's like, nope, got to go. So that, unfortunately, that day we weren't so slow Baja. We had miles to make.
For someone who's maybe a first-time Baja traveler and wants to do some off-roading, what kind of advice would you offer?
Yeah, that's a very good question. First-time Baja traveler who's staying on the paved roads, you should have a little bit of water in your car and, a blanket or whatever, emergency supplies. But, it's a pretty easy place. It's a lot more adventurous than Southern California in that the roads are narrower and, you can more easily have a traffic accident or something like that. But taking in the off-roading component, and again, while I've driven, 6, 8, 10,000 miles of dirt in Baja, I'm no Walker Evans. I don't consider myself an off-roader or an off-road racer. But most of the dirt, if you go slow, 25, 30 miles an hour fastest, you'll get through it easily. When I first started heading down there with the Land Cruiser, the fellow whose shop I used to use to service it said, well, he's ready to build the thing to tackle the Rubicon. And I said, wherever I'm going off-road, a local guy is going to come by in a Datsun B210 down on one cylinder on 3 bald tires with, 6 people in the car and the rear hatch off using it as a truck. That's not so true anymore. The Baja is a lot wealthier. The cars are a lot nicer. Most people have their windows up. I seem to be the only guy driving around down there, with no windows and eating dust now. But if you're going to go off-road, get a good map, You can download everything. I don't particularly use screens in the car when I'm driving around down there, but Google Maps or Benchmark Maps or any number of the iOverlander or whatever is going to be able to give you a squiggly line to follow wherever you want to go. I love the Benchmark New Road and Recreation Atlas. Before, people used to spend a lot of money hunting down old Baja almanacs. That's a wonderful thing. Another indispensable item, I love having one with me. You can get them at AAA or on eBay now, the vintage AAA fold-out paper map. They're not very expensive. They're great to have. Bring some water with you. Have a car that's in good service. Get off the road and drive slowly, and you should be all right.
No, that's good practical advice because, there's this urge when you have a 4x4 that you need to put lockers in it. You need to lift it. You need to have all of this underside protection and put in roll bars and stuff. And largely, I think that's just driven by marketing, different companies telling us we need these things.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And that is an awful lot of what I did with the La Carrera. I mean, just jumping in a 100 horsepower Datsun and driving flat out at the back, mid-pack on rainy, twisty mountain stages. But the way we approach the off-roading, my vehicle was the perfect vehicle for what I'm doing 50 years ago. It was the finest vehicle you could get for that job. Baja has not really changed at all. What has changed is, technology, Instagram. I've always kind of joked those government warning stickers. I'd like to get a little sticker that replicates that. It says warning for Instagram use only for all those off-road vehicles that you see, especially in Southern California. You can't go anywhere without seeing vehicle on 37-inch tires, rooftop, tent. They've got the pickaxe, they've got all the gas and everything. And it's like, dude, you're just at the mall. And so, if I can do it, if I can get my no suspension, 30-inch tires, air down, get onto some dirt with a paper map and an old Coleman cooler with some water in it, some beer. I mean, we usually have something to eat. We don't particularly take the extra gear to cook and do all the campsite stuff. I really love finding the little roadside stand. And so we're usually eating on the side of the road, buying tacos or what have you. But oftentimes, long day on the Baja XL, that means you're going into some little dusty grocery store in some little town and buying 2 packs of chips and whatever the local equivalent of a Slim Jim and a 6-pack of beer. And that's dinner. And that's okay with me. But yeah, again, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
The other propensity people have, in addition to putting a bunch of kit on their vehicles, is to carry every conceivable spare part and tool. And there was a time when I was new to off-roading that I kind of got into that habit. And after thousands of miles of trips, having not used 99% of that stuff, I just quit carrying it.
Yeah, you're really touching on the less is more. When you're taking on a 3,000-mile off-road trip in 10 days, you kind of think, oh, well, I need this and I need that. And you're among people who have a contingency plan for anything that may go wrong out in the middle of nowhere. Well, since 2012, again, I'm maybe conservatively 8,000 or 10,000 off-road miles on my old Land Cruiser, still driving around on the same tires. It's never broken down. It's never left me stranded. It stalled once and I figured out it had crank. It opened up the air cleaner. I had fuel. You could see that. And I looked at the air filter and it was just full of silt. And I took it out and banged it against the back bumper and all the silt dropped out of it, put it back in, put the lid back on it, fired right up. And so that vehicle is what my skills allow. And it's a great vehicle that can be fixed anywhere. I have some parts with me. I have some belts and a couple of hoses. And a couple of years ago, I had a strange failure that made me think I should bring a water pump with me. I did have a water pump fail when I was in the Datsun on the first day of La Carrera in 2006. That was a car that was never imported into Mexico. There wasn't going to be a water pump there. It was a problem to sort that out. We did sort it. And I have a water pump. That seems like a huge indulgence driving around. I have an old wooden box that came with the truck that is strapped into the back, and all that stuff goes into the box and I lock it up. And there's a shovel and a folding shovel and a machete and a couple other things. I usually don't open that box the entire trip. A couple Lucha Libre masks are in there, all those sort of things, some spare shot glasses. I keep that stuff in there, but I don't usually end up ever opening the box. And I don't want this to sound like it's bragging or any of that. I do keep the truck very well tuned. I do know my limitations mechanically it's a vehicle that anybody can fix, but you got to get it to the guy who can fix it. So I do like to keep it in great shape, but I'm with you, and I really feel less is more in so many ways. And I would like to reduce my kit by 50. And that's the challenge going forward, to like look at each piece of stuff, hold it in your hand, Marie Kondo style, and say, does this warm my heart? Do I need this? Nope. Okay, out it goes.
One of the other things I've been doing is taking a lesson from the backpacking world, because it's all been lightened as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's wise. My take on that is I'm really enamored by surplus, and surplus is so easy to find now. There are a couple of great sites. SwissLink has just great curation of stuff, and I just love that you're basically reduce, reuse, recycle, that you're finding some stuff that's been sort of, hate to say battle tested, but I just love the whole aesthetic of like thinking about 1971, a guy who, or maybe 1975, the second owner of my Land Cruiser, where was he going to go find his kit when he was going to go to Baja? He was going to go down to the Army Navy store and buy some junk, right? Some secondhand stuff on the cheap. And so I just kind of come up with that as an approach to what I'm doing. So I love to find vintage, surplus, what have you.
Funny that you say military surplus, because I remember buying a 5-gallon jerry can at the Supply Sergeant on Hollywood Boulevard 25 years ago. And it's an original German jerry can. It's post-war. So it's probably 1954 or so. I think it's stamped. $5.
Yeah.
I think it was marked $10. I asked if he would give me a deal, and it had probably been sitting there for years. So he gave it to me for $5. And meanwhile, on the internet, if you want to buy them, they're $50, $60.
So if you've got a rally style 356, and that's the one you need to have on there for Instagram use only.
That's
awesome.
right.
The only thing about buying surplus online, something to be aware of, as opposed to being in the shop poking it around, and you never get to smell the stuff. And if you're buying surplus, I'm not a freak, but I like to smell the stuff, because you get that Hungarian duffel bag, and you just can't get that musty smell out of it. And then you say, geez, I paid $10 for this, I should use it. And it's just, anytime you're around your truck, it's like, oh, what's that smell? Oh, it's my Hungarian duffel bag.
It's the same smell you get when you stick your head in the window of a 54 Packard or something,
Exactly. Yes.
I love it. There's two ways you can go in off-roading, which is the solitary experience or in a group. And discretion tells you go in a group, right? But do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, off-roading to me used to just be what we called car camping when we were kids.
Right.
So when I first started doing it, if we could convince somebody else to go with us, we did. And that was fun, because you had somebody else to pull you out if you got stuck. And again, we're talking about Baja, but we're also talking about being college kids, not being particularly well equipped. So I've driven all sorts of things to Baja: Toyota Corona, Volkswagen Westphalia, Datsun 510, lowered, not good off-road, a BMW Perry-Dakar motorcycle. You would think it'd be great off-road, but then you put 2 up on all your camp gear and it's horrible off-road, way too big and heavy. So I've gone in a few different things, 4Runners, Land Cruiser, what have you. The interesting thing getting involved with the Baja XL Rally, having a bunch of people from around the world that you don't know, but now you have something in common with them. And, there might be a bunch of guys in Raptors or, totally built Tacomas and all that stuff, Unimogs, what have you. And the ice may not be broken immediately, but hey, pull out a bottle of Fortaleza and start talking. And usually that melts people's facades pretty quickly. And so I've really gotten to enjoy doing these off-road events where you're going with some people. And at the pace that we're going, we are often, virtually the entire time, we're by ourselves. So the last event, the January, February 2021 Baja XL, I think I was by myself every day. We had a goal of recording 1 podcast a day. I don't know if we nailed that, but if you can imagine driving 200 to 300 miles a day on dirt and trying to work in a podcast somewhere on something, it was daunting. And we were out there by ourselves all the time. And so that's wonderful and awful. But when you start to see some of the other people from your event as you're getting closer to the destination, it just warms your heart. You say, hey, wait, you don't even know what that person's name is. We made up nicknames for everybody on the event, but it really does warm your heart to get onto a trail. And then it's like, hey, there's these guys that we've been calling the Allman Brothers. And then you get to the camp and, you pour out pull out the tequila and you start talking to them, and you think they're scruffy hipsters, and they turn out to be four of the most interesting people you've met. And here we are a couple of years later, I'm still in touch with, all of them. And that's, I think, one of the unexpected takeaways from doing a group event rather than a solo trip. One guy is the finest restorer of 80s Mercedes-Benz's, diesels. One guy is a very hip fashion designer for an entertainer in Los Angeles. One guy does astonishing upholstery work for vintage cars and works with wood when he's not doing Jaguar interiors. And another guy is an exceptionally talented photographer. Just again, four guys traveling together in an 80s Blazer. And so we ended up their four-wheel drive went out. So they were slower pace and being very careful about getting stuck and whatnot. So our paths started crossing regularly. And once we got that bottle of tequila on the table and had some tacos for lunch one day, I think we solved all the world's problems between the six of us in one bottle of tequila and, probably 24 tacos.
How do you divide your time between San Francisco and Baja?
Not very well. I'm in San Francisco way too often and need to get to Baja much more often. Life and work and other things get in the way, and so previously my wife worked in Los Angeles, and she was flying down Monday morning and flying back Fridays. And so I had a pad in downtown Los Angeles, which was kind of cool to have a loft down there and run into Magnus. Used to walk right in the alley behind, and it's kind of hip to just be around and learning some other stuff and seeing some other cool kids. And so that was a great diving off place when you're driving a 50-year-old Land Cruiser to drive 6 or 8 hours down to downtown LA, get to see my wife, which is good. And then, be a few hours from the border. Right now, it's been probably 3 months that I've been home, and I'm like Martin Sheen in Apocalypse Now. Every day I spend in this hotel room, I'm getting weaker.
In a flop sweat.
Don't get me started on Apocalypse Now quotes, because I'll go all day.
I'll be right back with more Horsepower Heritage. Don't go away. Today's episode of Horsepower Heritage is sponsored by Model Citizen Diecast. And if you like scale model cars, they've got a special deal for my listeners. Whether you're looking for race cars or street cars, they've got something you'll like in itty-bitty 1/64th scale all the way up to the ginormous 1/8 scale masterpieces from the Amalgam Collection. You can see it all at modelcitizendiecast.com, and when you use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout, you'll get 10% off your order. Limitations apply. Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. And now back to my interview with Michael Emery, right here on Horsepower Heritage.
In the 1930s, the WPA sent folks out into the hinterlands to capture America as it was. And they did a lot of audio recordings. And you must be familiar with this.
Yeah, Alan Lomax, and of course the FSA photographers, Walker Evans, Dorothea Lange. Yeah, I'm pretty well versed with that era.
Yeah, I figured you would be. I thought of that when I first started listening to your show, because you're documenting Baja in a similar fashion. You're talking to locals, you're capturing moments and slices of life. And I really like that about the show. How do you make your editorial decisions? How do you figure out what your next episode is going to be about, or with whom?
That's a great question. Anxiety drives a lot of that. Trying to I'm a one-man band. And so getting back to my roots, so we had the 77th anniversary of D-Day this past week. I was on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, sailed on an old World War II ship out of San Francisco as a photographer, spent months and months and months of my life photographing this project, photographing the restoration of the ship, photographing the voyage, 2 months at sea. A month at sea, then 2 months bouncing back and forth between England and France for the 50th anniversary of D-Day. And after that, did a book and an exhibition that traveled for a few years. And the project that I didn't do that still bothers me is I came in contact with all these merchant marine veterans who had not talked a lot about their war experience. They were somewhat kind of misfits. And Tom Brokaw did his book, The Greatest Generation. And, Saving Private Ryan had its moment. And all of a sudden, guys were talking. And for me, Marriage, Mortgage, and Minivan came on rather rapidly. And I wasn't able to sit around with people to record their stories. And I think that's still a valuable service. And in getting on to doing this Baja project, editorially, I want to talk to people who have done interesting things, who have lived interesting lives, who are known or unknown, and get their stories while they can still tell them firsthand, if possible. There are a couple of people on my list that have passed and a couple of people who sadly have some memory issues that I haven't really been able to get a good interview with them. So I think I'll have to talk to people, have people talking about them. But I think there's stories that should be told. The whole world of off-road auto racing stems from 1967. And so, that's 50 plus years ago. There's still people around who did it as young people who just figured it out on a cocktail napkin, went out to the shed and built it, and then went down to Baja and tried it and broke or didn't break or, figured out what to do next. And that is so intriguing to me. I could have an entire channel on just history of off-road racing. I mean, those people are nuts and they're bold and they're getting old, and somebody ought to be pulling those stories out of them. So that could be me, but I don't want to overload Slow Baja with off-road racing.
They just sold Big Oli.
They did. It went on Mecum. It went for $1.7 million. So I think with fees, it's like 1.8 and change. Pretty amazing result. Pretty amazing vehicle. And I think that's one of the amazing stories. And I'm not going to go too much into. I'm going to get that story. If Parnelli can't tell me, PJ's going to tell me the story. So that again, growing up, reading my dad's old road and tracks, knowing about Parnelli Jones through ABC Wide World of Sports with his buzz cut and, just looking macho, that he could drive at Indy and then jump into a Bronco and go airborne and win the Baja. I mean, are you kidding me? What cojones? I mean, that dude looked the part, was the part. Bill Stropp building stuff. I mean, Bill Stropp, the lineage from the La Carrera Panamericana, that he built those Lincolns, and then he was ended up, building Broncos for Ford and Baja. I mean, just the engineering value in that. I mean, it's a very cool story, and it will be a future episode of Slow Baja, I'm sure, talking about Big Oli and racing Broncos back in the day. But I want to talk to people who are, somebody's doing mule trips and fishing and all the reasons that people go to Baja, walking the El Camino Real, and, are pioneers in flora and fauna and mapping DNA of the Vaquero families and all that. So I've got a lot of a wide, diverse interest in the place. And if there's an editorial process, it's just me figuring it out, trying to think of who should I talk to next. And every once in a while, thank God, a reader or a listener sends me a message and says, you should talk to this person, which somebody did with Christian Beamish. And I said, well, who's that? And then quickly looked him up, got his book. And this is a guy who's just a surfer, built an 18-foot boat and taught himself to sail it, and then sailed it down the Baja Peninsula and luckily lived, because he should have died, and wrote a beautiful book about it that Patagonia published. And it was just the most amazing process of not knowing a thing about something, getting completely obsessed by it, reading a book cover to cover in a couple of days, and then finding the guy and, getting to him and getting him to agree to do the show. And then finding myself in his garage during COVID, wearing masks, however many feet apart from us, talking about his life. That is totally, what motivates me.
Well, I'm going to continue to listen, and I can't wait to see what you've got in store for me and the rest of your fans. And it's just a terrific show, Michael. I thank you very much for hanging out with me today and telling us some Baja tales.
Well, Maurice, I'm going to give you some big secrets behind the scenes. It's all tequila and dust.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. If you like what you've heard, follow the podcast, leave me a 5-star review, and if you want to get in touch, drop me a line at horsepowerheritage.com. Just click the contact button there, and that'll get you where you need to go. Until next time, I'm Maurice Merritt. Thanks for listening.